On Christmas Eve, my mother stood at the head of the table I had set, in the dining room of the house I had paid off, and looked directly at me in front of 53 guests. Her wine glass was raised. Everyone expected a toast. What came out instead was this: "I don't know what I did wrong raising you. 14 years in medicine, and you've forgotten how to be a daughter. Your brother." And here, she paused to smile at him, that warm, particular smile I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn. "Your brother calls me every single day. He would never miss Christmas. But you showed up tonight only because I guilted you into it. Some daughters choose career, some choose family. You've made your choice very clear." 53 people watched me absorb that. I am a cardiovascular surgeon. I have stood at an operating table for 11 hours without eating, hands inside someone's chest, keeping them alive, on focus and training alone. I have delivered the worst news a person can hear to families sitting in hallways who are not ready to hear it. I have not cried in front of a patient in 14 years. I did not cry that night either. I set down my fork, the good silverware my mother had asked me to buy the previous Thanksgiving, pushed my chair back from the table, and said very quietly, "Thank you for having me." I walked to the front closet, put on my coat, picked up my car keys from the bowl by the door, and stepped out into the cold Ontario night. My brother had been using that car for 6 weeks, a black Audi Q5, registered in my name, insured under my policy. He had borrowed it for just a few days in November and simply never returned it. I had let it go because I always let things go. That ended tonight. I was merging onto the 401 when the text came through, lighting up my phone on the passenger seat. "Bring it back." Then, 30 seconds later, "I'm calling the police. That's my car." I kept driving. I turned the heated seat on. I thought about the valve replacement I had performed 3 days ago on a 62-year-old retired teacher from Barrie. And I thought about my mother's face as she said what she said. And I drove north through the dark until the city thinned out around me and I could breathe again. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment to like this video and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight and what time is it where you are? Stay with me, because the drive I took that Christmas Eve finally showed me something I had been too afraid to see. 40 minutes later, I pulled into the underground parking of my condo in the Distillery District and sat in the dark with the engine running. The memories came the way they always do when I stop moving, in fragments, out of order, sharp at the edges. I remembered my first year of medical school at the University of Toronto, surviving on instant noodles and 2 shifts a week waiting tables on Queen Street, sending $300 home every month because my parents' small textile manufacturing business had just collapsed. My mother called that $300 a drop in the bucket and asked if I could do $500. I was 23 years old and living on $11 a day. I remembered my residency at Toronto General, 80 hours a week, sometimes 100, a salary of $61,000 before taxes, which sounds like something until you subtract rent and student loan payments, and the monthly transfer I had set up to my parents' joint account so their mortgage wouldn't lapse. My brother had just graduated with a business degree and was, in his words, exploring opportunities. He was 31 years old and living in the family home rent-free, eating food bought with money I sent, driving my mother's car to meetings with people he described as investors. I remembered the Christmas I couldn't come home because I was on call, a 40-hour stretch, and my mother called me 3 days later, not to ask how I was, but to tell me that my absence had ruined the holiday and that my brother had worked so hard to make it special. And why couldn't I at least have tried to switch shifts with someone? I had not switched shifts because a 12-year-old boy from Scarborough was in septic shock, and I was the only person in that hospital who knew how to manage his specific presentation. I didn't say that. I apologized. My brother had a supplementary card on my TD Visa account. I had given it to my mother years ago for household emergencies. Somehow it had migrated into his wallet. I told myself I would deal with it later. I told myself family was complicated. I told myself what I always told myself, that I was lucky to have a career, that sacrifice was part of loving people, that the money didn't matter as much as the relationship. I sat in that parking garage and I finally said the thing out loud, alone in the dark, that I had been too terrified to say for 14 years. I was not supporting my family. I was funding the story they told about themselves. My money was the backdrop against which my brother performed the role of provider, of capable son, of the one who really understood what family meant, while I was cast, permanently, as the cold one, the absent one, the one who had chosen career over the people who needed her. As though keeping their mortgage paid and their lights on was not a choice that cost me something every single month. My phone was ringing, unknown number, local area code. I answered. The dispatcher on the other end was professional, efficient, reading from a process. She asked whether I was the registered owner of a black Audi Q5 with an Ontario plate beginning with BKVF. She said a report had been filed claiming the vehicle was taken without the owner's consent. I took the same slow breath I take before making an incision. Yes, I said. I'm Josée Fortin. I'm the registered owner. The vehicle is in my possession at my home address, which is where it belongs, because I am the only person listed on the ownership, the insurance certificate, and the original bill of sale. The individual who filed this report is my brother. He has no legal claim to this vehicle. I can email you digital copies of all 3 documents right now. She asked me to hold. I opened the document folder I have kept on my phone since residency. The same habit I developed when losing a single piece of paperwork could delay a patient's treatment for weeks. I forwarded the ownership certificate, the insurance certificate, and the Mississauga dealership's bill of sale, all dated and bearing my name only, to the address she gave me. She came back 4 minutes later. Her tone had shifted slightly. She said they had received the documents and would be assessing the report. She thanked me. She wished me a good evening. I hung up and sat in the quiet. My brother had been willing to give me a criminal record on Christmas Eve, willing to risk a medical license that had taken 14 years and $400,000 in student debt to build, willing to see his sister prosecuted for theft of her own property, to protect his ego in front of our mother and a table full of relatives. There was no floor beneath it. I had been looking for one for years. I slept 4 hours. I was at the hospital by 6:30 the following morning. My chief of cardiology had recruited me out of my fellowship 9 years earlier. She had written the reference letter that got me onto the hospital's surgical committee. She was the kind of person who said exactly what she thought in the quietest possible voice, and that morning she called me into her office and closed the door, and the expression on her face told me we were not there to discuss a patient. She slid a letter across the desk. HR, copied to legal, flagging something that had surfaced during a routine benefits audit. A credit inquiry had been triggered using my SIN number as part of what appeared to be a loan application for a company I had never heard of. Alongside the letter, she had pulled a credit report through the hospital's identity protection service. The supplementary card had a current balance of $23,000. I had not used that card in over a year. I looked at the itemized charges: a leasing company in North York, a restaurant supply distributor in Etobicoke, a co-working space on King Street West billed monthly since February, a hotel deposit in Niagara Falls, $1,200 at a menswear shop on Bloor. Line by line, my brother had been building the fiction of a functioning consulting business on my credit: office space, business dinners, a website, a wardrobe, with money I had earned standing in an operating room. I set the letter down very carefully, the way you set down a tray of instruments when your hands are not entirely steady, and you cannot let that show. "Why are you allowing this to continue?" my chief asked. It was the most direct question anyone had ever asked me, and it was not unkind. I looked at the photo on her desk: her wife, her kids, Christmas at a cottage somewhere in the Muskokas, everyone in mismatched sweaters, the kind of Christmas I had funded for other people and never had for myself. "Because if I stop," I said, "I'm afraid she'll decide I was never worth loving in the first place." My chief was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does it mean if she already has?" I sat with that for about 10 seconds. Then I said, "I need to make some calls." She nodded. "Use my office." I called TD Bank first, sat through 2 minutes of hold music, then identified myself, confirmed my account number, and asked them to immediately freeze and permanently close the supplementary card ending in 4471 and decline all pending transactions. The specialist confirmed it was done in under 90 seconds. Somewhere across the city, the lights went out on my brother's imaginary empire. Then I opened the hospital's internal benefits portal and navigated to my life insurance beneficiary designations. I looked at my mother's name. I looked at my brother's name. I thought about the loan application run against my credit, the $23,000 in charges for a company that had never earned a dollar, and every phone call that had ended with my mother sighing and saying the money I sent was never quite enough. With 3 keystrokes, I removed both names from the policy entirely. I replaced them with the Sick Kids Foundation and closed the browser. Then I called a real estate lawyer whose number my chief had written on a sticky note. I had purchased my parents' house in 2019, $580,000 in Mississauga, paid off over 4 years with my surgical income because my parents had lost their business, and I was the only one who could help. My name alone was on the title. I had verified this twice. My sister-in-law had made a comment at a family dinner earlier that year about planning to renovate the living room in the spring, and I had checked the title again the following week. The lawyer explained the process clearly. As sole registered owner, I had the right to issue formal notice requesting the occupants vacate, following Ontario's required timelines. She could have a formal notice drafted and served before the end of the week. I told her to proceed. By the time my family arrived at the hospital 2 days later, they had been living in freefall for 48 hours. The supplementary card had been declined at a grocery store on the morning of the 26th. My brother's co-working space had emailed about a missed payment. His so-called business contact had stopped returning calls. I pieced this together later from sources I hadn't expected. What I witnessed directly was the three of them walking through the main entrance of my hospital at 11 in the morning on December 28th. My mother in the wool coat I had bought her 2 birthdays ago. My brother in the jacket I now knew had been charged to my card. My sister-in-law carrying a reusable bag as though she had brought documents or evidence or both. A colleague texted from the lobby, "I think your family is here?" I took the elevator down. My brother started talking before I reached him, too loud for the space, using the voice he saved for when he wanted to perform confidence in front of an audience. He said things about the credit card. He said things about respect. He said my name the way he always said it when he was performing, with a particular emphasis, as though it were a credential that belonged to him. I stood still and let him finish. Then I opened the envelope I was carrying and held it out to him. Inside were 2 documents, a copy of the vehicle ownership certificate, my name and no other name anywhere on the page, and the formal notice from my lawyer, 60 days, the Mississauga property, please make arrangements for alternative accommodation by the date specified. My sister-in-law took it from his hands and read it. I watched her face as she understood what she was holding. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she had nothing at all to say. My mother tried then. She was always good at this part, the pivot to grief, the trembling voice, the careful inventory of everything she had given and how little she had received in return. She reached for my arm and I let her hold it. I looked at her while she spoke. I thought about the toast 2 days ago, the smile she had aimed at my brother, the choice of words in front of 53 people. When she finished, I said, "I know you believe all of that. I think you've believed it for a long time. But I need to live as though it isn't true." I walked back to the elevator. If you agree that sometimes the most honest thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from their own choices, please hit the like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what's the hardest boundary you've ever had to hold with someone you loved? The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. My aunt called from Hamilton and said some things that I wrote down so I wouldn't forget them. She called me unfeeling. She used the word family the way some people use the word God, as something so large and sacred that questioning it becomes heresy. When she finished, I said, "I would love for you to open your home to them while they get settled, your family too." She said she didn't have the space. She said she had to check the oven. She hasn't called back. My sister-in-law left my brother in the 3rd week of January. When the actual financial picture came into focus, no car, no house, no credit, no functional business, she decided her 7-year investment was not worth the return. She moved back to her parents' place in Oakville. My brother was alone in the Mississauga house for the first time in his life, counting down to the date on the notice. He called me once during that period. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. I told my therapist all of it. She had been asking about my family for 2 years in the careful, patient way that good therapists ask, and I had been deflecting for 2 years in the practiced way that surgeons deflect. Now I told her everything, the card, the car, the toast, the letter, the lobby, all of it. When I finished, she said, "What does it feel like now?" "Like I've stopped bleeding," I said, "but I don't know yet if the damage was too much." "That's honest," she said. My brother knocked on my door on the last Sunday of February, nearly 9 at night, and I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift. I saw him through the peephole before I opened the door. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but something about the way he was standing, shoulders in, no jacket adequate for February in Toronto, made him look like a version of himself left out in the cold too long. I opened the door. He didn't have a speech prepared. That surprised me more than anything else. My brother had always had a speech ready, at family dinners, at Christmas, at every gathering where he needed to perform the role of the capable one. Tonight he stood in the hallway of my building, with red-rimmed eyes and the kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. "I don't know how to do any of it," he said. "I don't know how to pay rent or negotiate with a landlord or cook anything that isn't from the freezer aisle. I spent 14 years letting you handle everything and telling myself I was doing you a favor by letting you feel useful." His voice broke on the last word. He stopped. Started again. "I used to introduce myself as your brother at every dinner party, my sister the surgeon, like that was my job, like I had a job. I'm 40 years old and I don't know what I'm for." I had expected anger. I had expected blame or demands or a new angle. This was something else. This was a man who had been living inside a borrowed identity for so long that losing it had left him with nothing underneath. I stepped back from the door. "Come in," I said. "Sit down." I made tea, not because it would fix anything, but because it gave us both something to do with our hands. He sat at my kitchen table and looked at the walls, and I sat across from him and let the silence be what it was. Then I said, "I'll cover first and last month's rent, so you're not sleeping on a floor, once. That's the only money that's coming." He nodded. The provincial government has a skilled trades apprenticeship program. Electrician, plumber, HVAC technician. You look it up, you choose one, you enroll, and you finish it. Not because I'm asking, because you need something that's actually yours. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What if I'm not any good at it?" "You'll find out," I said. "That's what doing something is for." He left an hour later with the name of the Ontario College of Trades website and a bag of groceries I assembled from my fridge. The way my father used to send me back to residence with containers of food when I was in medical school, before he got sick, before the money ran out and everything changed. I stood at the closed door and thought about my father for the first time in months. He used to say that the only thing worth giving someone was the confidence that they could handle what came next. I had not given my brother that. I had given him reasons to believe he didn't need to handle anything. The fall came with that particular quality of light that Toronto gets in September, when the air changes and everything contracts slightly as the city returns to itself after summer. I had taken 2 weeks in August and driven out to Prince Edward Island alone, the first real holiday I had taken in 3 years, and I came back steadier than I had left. My brother had been in his first month of an electrical apprenticeship with a company in Etobicoke. He texted me a photo of himself on a job site in steel-toed boots, squinting into the sun with the specific exhaustion of someone who had actually worked all day. He looked tired. He looked like a person. My mother had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Mississauga, modest, quiet, hers in the sense that her name was on the lease and she paid the first of every month from her pension and savings. She called me on my birthday in September. It was the first year in recent memory that she did not mention money, did not bring up what I owed or what she needed. She asked how I was sleeping. She asked whether I was eating properly. It was the most ordinary conversation we had ever had, and I sat on my couch after and held the phone in my lap for a long time. We had dinner at her apartment in October, takeout from a Thai place on her Ontario, eaten at her kitchen table on mismatched cutlery. My brother came. He talked about the job, about a senior electrician who had taken him under his wing, about how strange it felt to be tired at the end of a day for reasons that were actually his. My mother listened to him with that familiar warmth, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel the absence of it aimed at me as a wound. I recognized it simply as information about who she was, and I had built my life around the actual shape of things now, not the shape I had always wanted them to be. I drove home on the 401 after dinner, the same highway I had driven that Christmas Eve, with my knuckles white on the wheel and my whole body braced against something I couldn't yet name. The city spread out ahead of me in the dark, lit the way it always is, and I thought about what it had cost me to stay quiet for 14 years and what it had cost me to finally stop. Both costs were real. But there is something that happens when you stop rescuing a person from themselves. You return them to their own life. You return yourself to yours. I had spent 14 years believing that love meant absorbing damage quietly and funding whatever came next, and I had been wrong. The most honest thing I ever did for my family was to stop. I am a surgeon. I know that the hardest part of any procedure is not the cutting. It is the moment before, when you have to be completely certain that what you are removing is doing more harm than good, and then steady enough to follow through. For the first time in 14 years, I had been both. If this story gave you the courage to ask yourself that question, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What was the hardest boundary you ever had to set with your own family, and what finally made you hold it?